Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Cunningham. I'm the AVP of Alumni Relations here at Lehigh. And today we are going to talk about the pursuit of happiness with two fantastic guests. We have Dr. Naomi Rothman. She's an associate professor of management and organizational behavior in Lehigh Business, our College of Business. And we have Khanjan Mehta, who is the vice provost of creative inquiry. And they are going to take us through a presentation for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to your questions. In order to ask a question, go to the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen, and just click on that. And you can either write your question to all attendees, so everyone on the webinar will see it, or just to the panelists. And I will read those questions aloud for our guests today, so they can focus on answering your questions. We'll also send out the presentation and a recording of this, along with some resources after. You'll see that tomorrow after our presentation. So the success of these does depend on your interaction. So I do hope that you have lots of questions and comments for our presenters today. All right, Dr. Rothman, take it away.
All right, thank you so much for having me and Khanjan. I'm really excited to talk about this very timely topic, a question that's particularly pertinent during this kind of ongoing global pandemic, in which many of us are feeling some pretty complex and bittersweet emotions. So I'm going to be talking about the pursuit and the hard truths of happiness today. In the next 15 minutes, we're going to actually move pretty quickly through a series of questions about happiness, starting with what is happiness. I'm a professor of organizational behavior and a scholar of emotions. So I'm then going to provide a high-level review of the research on the simple things that make us happier and that do not make us happier. And I want, if you would like more details, I would also highly recommend that you take Dr. Laurie Santos's class, The Science of Wellbeing, on Coursera. Ultimately, particularly during these times when people are struggling, I think I would be remiss to ignore the dark side of pursuing happiness. And this segues into my own research, in which I focus on what to do about this dark side, right? And how do we shift our thinking and the norms about our emotions in order to benefit from the mixed feelings that we have, which will then lead me to Khanjan's introduction of his new exciting program, the Happiness Institute, which is going to be a new program from the Office of Creative Inquiry starting in January 2021. So I, at that point, will hand off the baton. So what is happiness? Writers and thinkers have offered a wide range of definitions. Many social psychologists use the term well-being synonymously with the term happiness. I think about it as an emotional state or trait that you could have been born with that is associated with subjective well-being, but it is not the only emotional state that is correlated with well-being. And I will get to that later on. So let's start by presenting research on the simple things that make us happier. The good news is that decades of research shows that your happiness will increase if you do some pretty simple things. One thing is that you can find work that you find engaging and find leisure activities that you find engaging. So what does that mean? Work that uses your signature strengths. This is work by Seligman, and you can take the VIA test online. Work that matches your skills and challenge your skills. So this allows you to become fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus, which has been called flow. You can also work on developing a growth mindset. And this is the belief that intelligence and ability can be trained, that aren't fixed. And ultimately, in the face of failure and setbacks in your life, they allow you to, this mindset allows you to bounce back rather than fall into a state of learned helplessness. Ultimately, engagement can increase your positive emotions. It can make you more productive at work. It can make you more satisfied with your job. These positive experiences ultimately can also allow you to turn a job into a calling. What else can you do? The second simple thing you can do is to increase your happiness is to connect with others. So we know that very happy people have more close friends. They have strong family ties and romantic ties. They spend less time alone and more time with their family and friends. They're also less vulnerable to premature death. They're more likely to survive fatal illnesses. They're less likely to fall prey to stressful events. So how do you do this? Well, you can engage in acts of kindness. In fact, there's research that shows that if you engage in 5 acts of kindness in a single day, your happiness will increase. Research also shows that if you spend money on others rather than on yourself, $5, right, $20, your happiness will increase compared to those who spend the money on themselves. The third simple thing you can do is to value time and experiences over money. Most of us value money over time, but research has shown that having more time actually makes us happier than having more money. And one reason for this is that having more time may allow us to have a greater number of social connections or more in-depth social connections. 2 more simple things you can do today is to increase your happiness is to engage in some mind control. So we know that 46.9% of our waking hours are spent in mind wandering, where we're ruminating about the past, we're thinking about the future. Many of us are doing this during COVID as an escape mechanism. But sadly, this can reduce our happiness and there's an emotional cost essentially to thinking about what is not happening in the present. So one answer is to develop a meditation practice, which can curb your mind wandering. It can boost your positive emotions. It can also increase social connection and kindness acts. Perhaps the simplest thing you can do as well to increase your happiness is to take care of our bodies, getting exercise, and getting sleep. So if you engage in exercise for 3 times a week for 30 minutes, it's been shown to improve recovery among people with major depression. Getting sleep, which here is defined as getting 7.5 hours a night, which I don't remember the last time I got that much sleep, but if you can, it will improve your mood, and it will also reduce physical and emotional complaints. So what does not make us happier? Most of the things that we think are really important for happiness don't do as much for our happiness as we think they do. In fact, income is only correlated with life satisfaction at a level of 0.10. What salary is enough to make us happy? Well, the reality is this is subjective. We always feel that we need more. People who make $30,000 think they're going to be significantly happier if they make $50,000. People who make $100,000 a year think they're going to be significantly happier if they make $250,000. In fact, in 2010, research showed that $75,000 was the threshold beyond which income is not highly correlated with happiness. There's also longitudinal research which shows that being more materialistic, in fact, can reduce your life satisfaction or is correlated with reduced life satisfaction 20 years later. Trying to achieve the perfect body, in fact, may reduce your well-being, and trying to gaining perfect grades, in fact, only increases your happiness marginally, and getting lower than expected grades, in fact, people who have higher happiness when they achieve lower than expected grades than they predicted. And this last one is the most surprising to me. Believe it or not, being married, in fact, only increases your happiness in the first few years, and beyond that, married people are not happier than people who are not married. Okay, so of course, happiness can come from these simple things, right? And it's good to be reminded of them. From engagement, from connection, from time, from meditation, exercise, sleep. It also doesn't come from some of the things that we think it comes from. But I want to caution us, the over-promotion of happiness definitely has some downsides. In fact, the pursuit of happiness could be making us less happy. And let me explain the logic here. We have cultural norms around emotions. So we are socialized to seek positive emotions and to avoid negative emotions. When we feel bad, maybe we feel sad, anxious, scared. What do? We often suppress these emotions. We avoid them. We try to numb them by going on social media. I do this. Maybe we feel ashamed of them. This is learned. Our cultural norms actually make us ill-equipped for dealing with negative emotions. So what's the alternative? Well, one answer that I've been doing research on is to accept all of our emotions, both positive and negative. And the reason is that they have an evolutionary function. When we feel an emotion, it actually provides us with information about our environment. And it can help us respond to our environment that enables us to survive and thrive. And let me give you some examples to bring this to life. So fear might be caused by seeing a tiger or a bear, right? And the immediate response is to run away. Well, that's helpful for survival purposes. It may not be helpful though, if you need to engage in dialogue with that bear or that tiger. Guilt is caused by feeling that you've transgressed towards someone else. It's helpful. It leads us to address the transgression. Empathy is caused by feeling that somebody's in distress, and it actually leads us to help the person in distress. Sadness is caused by a sense of loss. It's helpful because it invites other people in to care for us. We can also have mixed feelings, and I've spent my career unpacking how these are helpful to us. I'll talk about that in a minute. But all of these emotions are natural and functional in certain contexts. Each is functional. Not all are functional in all contexts, right? The point is, though, is that they are part of the process of coming to consciousness. So what are you feeling right now? If I were in a class, I'd have you enter this information into what's called a word cloud, and we'd create this really beautiful image of all the feelings that you're having right now. We don't have time for that, so I'm just going to guess what you're feeling. In the face of COVID-19, where many of us are dealing with some hardship, perhaps some loss, but also some time, right? Additional time with our families. Many of us are feeling both happy and sad. And this is a guess, right? Sadness or grief for the loss of our normal lives, or maybe some of us have had more significant losses, along with hope for the coming vaccine. And these mixed emotions actually might be making you feel rather uncomfortable, especially if you're from the USA or from a culture that is individualistic, right? Like the United States. But according to my research over the past 15 years, there are many upsides to having these mixed feelings. In fact, they serve a purpose. Across many papers, my colleagues and I have found kind of this growing evidence for what I've called the flexibility function of mixed emotions. In fact, what we've shown is that you can harness your mixed emotions, where you feel positive and negative at the same time, for increasing flexibility and openness in decision-making, in leadership, in health and well-being, and in negotiation. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. In terms of decision-making, in fact, they can increase feeling mixed emotions, happy and sad at the same time, can make you more creative. It can help people become more open to expert advice and therefore make more accurate decisions. It can help people become less defensive in the face of threatening negative feedback, for instance, that they're prejudiced. It can also increase the extent to which people pay attention to social cues, like, are their decisions harming others? Or are there norms for morality that in my environment that I should be paying attention to? And it can also help people see things with more nuance and complexity. In terms of leadership, we've shown that feeling mixed emotions can help leaders become more adaptable and followers to become more proactive. They step up. One reason for this is that mixed emotions seems to help people and leaders seek more information from their team members, which is then mimicked by the team members who seek more information from one another. Mixed feelings are also helpful and beneficial for health and well-being. So frequent experiences of mixed emotions have been strongly associated with long-term health covering a whole variety of bodily systems. They've been also been shown to help people develop a strategy of taking the good with the bad, which allows people to confront and process the negative events that led to their negative emotions to begin with. So they can face the negative life events, they can gain insight, they can gain meaning from those negative experiences. It can also promote well-being in the future, right? It has been shown to combat depression, allow people to recover from grief when they've lost a significant other. And in recent research, we've been showing that it promotes resilience and adaptability among working mothers during COVID-19. So basically, this literature is describing that the experience of mixed emotions during times of stress, perhaps like what we are currently enduring, are actually really closely intertwined with resilience. And finally, and this is not a political statement, I'm just showing you this picture because he's expressing mixed emotions on his face through the tension and conflict, right, that is triggered by feeling positive and negative at the same time. And so my dissertation research showed that showing your mixed feelings, like Obama here is perhaps here in the images, can actually make the people we negotiate better problem solvers, and it can actually help you reach better win-win negotiation solutions as long as the relationship is cooperative. And so in all, the evolutionary function of mixed feelings, which you may be having right now, is that they may have actually developed as an affective mechanism to enable us to flexibly respond and adapt to the complex and changing circumstances of our times. So how many of you have had to pivot in your work or in your life over the past 10 months? Maybe in a role or in a task or a conversation because you were interrupted. How many of you are parents? Well, one reason you may have actually been able to pivot is because you were experiencing mixed emotions that motivated you to solve those problems in a flexible and adaptable and resilient manner. Okay, so what do we do? Well, I would suggest that we might, in fact, try to engender mixed feelings. How do we do that? Maybe you're feeling sad or grief at the moment. Identify that emotion and accept it. There's an evolutionary purpose. Find ways at the same time to perhaps feel positive emotions and happiness. And I've suggested some ways you can do this. Engage, connect, create time, meditate, exercise, sleep. You can even savor a positive aspect of your experiences or express gratitude to someone else, which can increase your happiness. We can also create a culture of acceptance of mixed feelings in our families and in our organizations, which may be a tall order in an individualistic society. But if we can normalize our feelings of both negative emotions and positive emotions, we may realize the evolutionary purpose of these emotions, which is enhanced flexibility. And finally, we can embody the balance or equanimity between negative and positive emotions, right? We have a huge emotional impact on our households, in our organizations, in our classrooms, right? And this is because emotions are contagious. So we can be the calm in the storm for other people, and we will transmit that calm if we can accept our mixed feelings rather than feel ashamed by them or try to suppress them. And so now that you know this information, are you going to make changes? Well, unfortunately, we know that knowing something is actually not enough for changing our behavior. It's actually not half the battle. We have to change our habits. And being intentional about doing things that make us happy have a really powerful effect on how happy we are. And this is over above our genetic set point and the circumstances in which we find ourselves. But we often put our energy into pursuing the wrong things. And so Khanjan has created this amazing class to help students create more happiness in their lives.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Dr. Rothman, I must say. So at Lehigh, we're all about this journey from theory to practice, right? So let's talk about this journey from this finite and fascinating knowledge to the infinite opportunities to apply this knowledge and create happy futures. This journey from inquiry to impact is central to the philosophy and operations of my Office of Creative Inquiry and the Mount Top Initiative. And this topic is, as Naomi pointed out, particularly relevant right now with the pandemic, where our students are stressed out in never-ending Zoom calls in their parents' basements with little social connection and arguably little happiness. So what struck me about this science of happiness is that happiness can be created. And I love that narrative. I like to create stuff. And so we created a hands-on and hearts-on program where students can leverage the science of happiness to imagine and create happy futures for themselves and for the ones around them or beyond. So this is a 3-week program. We're going to spin it off in January of next year in just 3 weeks with 5 interwoven themes. So even before the students start, they read Sonia Lyubomirsky's book on the How of Happiness, and then they explore global megatrends, geopolitical realities, demographic shifts, the democratization of innovation. Essentially, they are trying to understand how the world is changing, how it is becoming increasingly vulnerable, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous, and how they can find themselves and develop their skill sets and mindsets to not just survive, but thrive in this ambiguous environment. Happiness is as much outward as it is inward. It is tied to our sense of purpose, our sense of meaning and community. And Lehigh students, as we know, like a lot of our alums, want to go out and change the world. And so in the second week of this program, students will take a deep dive into the fundamentals of social innovation and global sustainable development. They'll be working in small teams on a number of collaborative projects and virtual escape rooms. They will be engaging in intimate conversations with each other. They'll be talking to interesting people from various walks of life, with Zen monks and billionaires and CEOs and nonprofit leaders, with social innovators and entrepreneurs, and also their parents and grandparents. They will be applying the principles of design thinking, systems thinking, and entrepreneurship to create a blueprint for a multi-million smile enterprise, right? They've been this idea of building multi-million-dollar enterprises so ingrained in them. We want them to pivot and think about building multi-million smile enterprises that improve the human condition. And finally, there's a significant personal component where they will, again, drawing from the science of happiness, write letters of gratitude to their mentors and cook a new cuisine and practice mindfulness and cultivate the virtue of awe. In essence, this is a high-octane program where every step of the way they're engaged in critical inquiry and reflection on the trajectory of their most important project, which is their own life. And what they're really doing here, if you take a step back, is to find their ikigai. Naomi, if you can go to the previous slide. Ikigai is your reason for being. It's about finding this intersection between what you love, what you can be paid for, what you're good at, and what the world needs. In other words, finding this intersection between your vocation, profession, mission, and passion. And this program is designed to help them find their ikigai. And I believe that, that is arguably probably the most important step towards developing the kinds of skill sets, mindsets, and portfolios. If you can go to the next slide, that'll help propel them to lead lives of impact. And in doing so, they will create their own happiness. So that's, in essence, the program. And I think somebody from our team can share a link to this program with you. But at this point, we should absolutely open it up for questions.
Yes. So it's so clear that both of you have found some of that ikigai in your work. Congratulations. Yeah, and I would be remiss, you mentioned, Dr. Rothman, that people who engage with others and people who give to others are better off. So I'll just put in a plug for connecting with other Lehigh alumni. That's what we do in my office, and giving to scholarship that would benefit Lehigh students. So just putting a plug in that will make you all more happy. So let's get to some questions. We have one from Janelle. About mixed emotions. Is the ability to identify mixed emotions associated with emotional intelligence? And if so, who's able to benefit from this? Do we see differences in terms of age, cohort, race, class, gender, et cetera?
Oh, that's such a great question. In fact, emotional intelligence is, an ability that we can all create. It's not a trait that you were born with. And it is essentially at its core, teaching people to be able to identify the emotion, the trigger, right, of where it comes from, and to be able to differentiate pretty well between the emotions. So you're not just feeling good and bad, you're feeling happy, sad, guilt, regret, you're being very discreet in your ability to identify them. And yes, indeed, being able to identify your emotions in a more kind of discrete manner, complex manner, in fact, can yield but greater well-being. Mixed emotions, we have studied kind of this question in an empirical way, using experiments and surveys to be able to demonstrate the benefits, right, on these very specific outcomes. In terms of differences, there's some research suggesting that older people, in fact, are better able to hold a positive and negative emotion at the same time. And so there's something about age that perhaps teaches older people not to suppress the negative and to kind of hold it along with the positive.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah.
John's question: don't we have to choose to be happy rather than pursuing being happy?
Khanjan?
Or do we choose to pursue being happy?
Yeah, I mean, I see all the challenges with this pursuit of happiness, something we're trying to find versus something we're trying to create. So yes, I believe, and based on what I've read from the literature, we have to choose to be happy. I think Sonia Lyubomirsky's book on the How of Happiness, I found that to be fascinating. Dr. Rothman shared with us that visual where 50% of happiness is genetically determined, 10% is based on your circumstances, But then you have the other 40%. That's your action and thoughts. That's what you have control over. And there are little things you can do. And Dr. Rothman gave us a bunch of those that are going to help, that are going to make us happier. You know, I've been practicing this now for the last month and a half since I've started working on the development of this program. I've started integrating a number of these little things, very simple little things in my day-to-day life. And you know what? It works. It works. I feel a little more calm, a little less anxious. I've been, you know, going through 12 hours of Zoom calls a day with less trepidation. So yes, happiness is in your hands. It's a choice we make. It's a series of thoughtful, intentional actions we pursue.
Yeah, and just to add on the choices, what we're trying to articulate is that there are choices that are going to lead to more happiness, and there are choices that are going to lead to less happiness. And so our knowledge about this and our practice of doing the work of choosing the right actions, right, will in fact yield better results. Yes.
Right. Edmund has a comment. Happiness does not come from success. Success comes from happiness. Make the students happier and they'll be more successful. I like that.
Bingo. I really like that. And there's evidence suggesting that happiness can enhance creativity. It's the, you know, the sense that it broadens our minds and allows us to build. We can see things more broadly, but mixed emotions can also do the same. So
yeah. Sandra has a good question about the statistics of people taking medications because of a change in emotions level, for example, depression. So can you talk a little bit about what the effect of medications are on happiness and how you balance all of that?
That's a really great question. There is evidence, and I am not a clinical psychologist, so this is a little bit beyond my area of expertise, but there is evidence where they've compared some of these mechanisms I suggested, or these activities, right, with activities where, for instance, you exercise and you take medication, right, versus just exercise versus just take medication versus a control condition, right? And you know, these can work hand in hand with one another, and can facilitate each other. But I will also say I'm not a clinical psychologist.
Great. Jean-Pierre has a great question that maybe I could answer. Since social contact is so important to one's happiness, and given the extreme isolation because of the pandemic, what's the reason for not allowing video for this webinar? So I'll take a crack at that one. That's a really interesting point. And we'll talk about that behind the scenes with staff. But one reason is just practical. We've got 87 participants. And so it would just make it a little unwieldy to have so many people. I'm sure there are studies on the maximum number of Zoom participants it takes to create intimacy and social connection versus chaos. I don't know them off the top of my head. But we will look at that. That's a good point. Sally's question, does this team and program take into account the neurobiology learnings about how the brain itself affects and is affected by environment? Thinking about Huberman at Stanford, might this team conduct online seminars for alumni? That was my question too.
Yeah, so I can pick that up. So there is Huberman at Stanford, and we have Dr. Julie Miva at Lehigh, who is actually one of the leading researchers in this particular space. And she's been working with our team. In fact, I just spoke to her this morning, and she's going to be sharing her research and her insights with our students on the role that various happiness molecules, as they are called, like dopamine and serotonin, endorphins, play in our happiness levels. And how, I mean, it's a game, you know, it really is a game. And how do we, you know, surround ourselves with people, with experiences, choose to engage in certain actions that help us optimize how those different molecules function and affect our happiness. So that's absolutely a part of the program.
Great. We are at 1 o'clock, but would you guys stay on for another 5 minutes while we get through a couple more questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, super. And then again, for participants who need to leave, this is being recorded, so you can pick up at 1 o'clock. If you have to leave now, you can watch the recording. Urime's question is there a correlation between happiness and culture?
There's cross-cultural research on emotions and norms around emotional experiences. There are, I mentioned that there are pressures to feel happy in Western societies, in individualistic cultures, and those pressures don't exist as much in Eastern cultures, and so we see expressions of mixed emotions far more prevalently in Eastern cultures and collectivistic cultures. And so, yes, there is a whole body of research on cross-cultural differences in emotional experiences and expressions.
Philip's question is precious. I have to ask it right now. He says, I'm a parent of a Lehigh student and freshman at NYU. My wife and I are now empty nesters. Much of our happiness was tied to the close engagement and presence of our children. What have your studies shown in terms of happiness within a marriage after the kids have flown from the nest? I think you'd have a wide range of answers to that right now, Philip.
It's a great question, and I don't think I can answer at the moment with my toddler climbing on me. I apologize for the...
I bet it's the grass is always greener, right?
Yeah, I can't answer that one, but I can answer the other one, which is about what I've been doing to enhance my happiness. And it ties right back to children. So I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I've been doing 2 sets of things. One is just spending a little more time with them, just playing doll and playing, with erector sets and, electricity kits, and just spending more time with them. And I found that to be really helpful. The other thing I've done, which is just amazingly working for me, is just reaching out to some of my students, reaching out to some of my colleagues from yesteryears that I've not been in touch with. And at least with some of my students, that actually kicked off a beautiful chain of conversations across a number of students. And they've been reaching out to each other. And we've had a couple of Zoom calls just to see how people are doing, how people are coping. And I've received so many little emails, like some are like a couple of sentences, some of them are like a page long, from my students expressing, what they're going through, their gratitude at times, and that works beautifully. And all it takes is to pick up the phone, write a few more emails, and these emails, as my students, are actually more fun and more relaxing to write, because before you realize, you filled up 2 pages.
Right. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I would just chime in and say, with regard to the question, right, is that I think the tactics that lead to happiness that we talked about earlier can be implemented within a variety of contexts and stages of life, right? And so they may actually afford what's called time affluence, not having your children at home. And in fact, having more time has been associated with having greater happiness. There are other benefits that might come from it, opportunities, for instance, to engage in deep work, like that gets us into the state of flow. I know my parents, when we left the home, my brother and I, like they had an opportunity to do more of those hobbies that allowed them to get into state of flow.
Great. Let's see, Mark Barone, who was actually one of our, another Mountain Talk featured star a couple of weeks ago, asks, what does research say about how triggers of happiness differ throughout life? At some stage, family will create happiness, and in other times it may be career.
That's such a great question. And I think the reality is, that our lives are fluid, and our ability to flexibly and adaptively respond to what is truly giving us happiness and we are able to get into the immersive state of doing, right? The side hobbies versus the work, right, is going to be in flux and to change, and to be responsive to that change is where we're going to be able to kind of maximize our happiness, right?
Right. And Janelle, who's a sociologist and Lehigh alum, says sociological family research find that marriages become stronger once children have flown the coop, and that happiness declines between couples after having their first child.
That's right.
Interesting. And then let's do one last questions here from Marianne. How do music and food play into happiness?
Well, wonderful thing about music and food is that they're often experienced with others. And so to sit around the table with family, friends, perhaps on Zoom these days, but perhaps face-to-face, right, allows us to have these times where they are set times where you're sitting with others and engaging with them. And that certainly, we know, right, connection is a source of happiness. And again, music can be a source of the state of flow, right, to get into that immersive state of being fully engaged in something. So playing music, right, but also listening to music.
Great. All right. Khanjan, any last words about the Institute?
You know, I didn't want to go back to the other question of what can you do to, like, a practical thing you can do. I had a great conversation with Lindsay Lebresco yesterday, who's our Lehigh brand manager. And she had a beautiful little nugget of wisdom. She said she keeps a stack of Post-it notes with her at all times. And anytime she sees something she likes, she'll write a little note and compliment people on kinds of little things. If she's like, sees Christmas lights she likes, she'll leave a little Post-it note. She leave notes on people's desks, on people's cars. And I thought that was such a simple little thing you can do by complimenting others. That makes her happier, and I'm sure makes those people happy as well. With the serendipity, there's the word happiness comes from hap, and how do we have more of that hap around us is something that I find fascinating. Nice. So we're pretty excited about the Institute, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I would love to hear more. We can report back to this group how it went, and yeah, maybe do something similar for alumni. All right, thank you both so much, and thanks to everyone on the call. Have a great rest of your week and enjoy the snow.